15 years of marriage, 3 children, and not one of them was mine. It feels surreal even to write those words, but this is my story. The story of how everything I believed to be true unraveled in the most devastating way. For 15 years, I thought I had built a life most people would envy. I had a loving wife, 3 wonderful children, and a home filled with the kind of laughter and love that made even the hardest days worthwhile. My mornings began with the sound of little feet racing down the hallway, and my evenings ended with family dinners where we shared stories, jokes, and plans for the future. Every birthday, anniversary, and family vacation felt like proof that I was living the life I had always dreamed of. I met my wife when we were both in our early 20s, back when the world felt full of endless possibilities. She was magnetic, smart, funny, and so full of life that it felt like she could light up any room she walked into. Falling in love with her was effortless, and it didn't take long for us to imagine a future together. We got married a few years later, and soon after, our first child was born. I can still remember holding that tiny baby in my arms for the first time, overwhelmed by a mixture of love, awe, and the weight of responsibility. Over the years, our family grew. 2 more children followed, and with them came all the joys and challenges of parenthood. First words, first steps, school plays, scraped knees, and sleepless nights. I cherished every single moment. My identity became inseparable from my role as a father and husband. The love I felt for my children was profound, and the pride I felt in our little family was unmatched. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, even when you least expect it. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that I ignored. They were small at first, so subtle that I didn't recognize them for what they were. A family friend once joked that one of my children didn't look much like me. At the time, I laughed it off, chalking it up to the kind of harmless comment people make without thinking. There were other moments too, like when my wife joked about how the kids must have inherited their good looks from her side of the family. It seemed innocent then, but now I wonder if she was hiding something in plain sight. There were times when my wife seemed distant, but I attributed it to the pressures of parenting and maintaining a household. Every marriage has its ups and downs, I told myself, and we were no exception. I believed that the love we shared would carry us through any rough patch. The turning point came during a routine medical checkup for one of my children. The doctor made an offhand comment about a genetic trait that didn't align with my family's medical history. At first, I dismissed it as a mistake, but the comment lingered in my mind, planting a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. For weeks, I tried to push the thought away, convincing myself that I was overthinking. But the doubt began to creep into every corner of my mind, tainting even the happiest memories. I started to notice things I hadn't before. The shape of a jawline, the color of a child's eyes, the way they laughed. Small details that now felt glaringly unfamiliar. I began to replay moments from the past, searching for clues I might have missed. My wife's behavior didn't help. She had always been private, but lately, her distance felt deliberate. She spent more time on her phone, and I couldn't ignore how quickly she turned the screen away when I was near. There were late nights when she claimed she was working or catching up with friends, but her excuses felt thin. During one rare argument, she accused me of being distant, of not being the man she had married. Her words stung, but what struck me more was the way she deflected when I tried to talk about our relationship. Instead of engaging, she became defensive, accusing me of creating problems where none existed. By then, the doubts had grown too large to ignore. I knew I needed answers, but I also knew I couldn't confront her without proof. Ordering DNA test kits felt like an act of betrayal, but the questions in my mind had become too loud to silence. When the kits arrived, I hesitated for hours before opening the box. Every step of the process felt agonizing. Collecting the samples from my children was the hardest part. I reassured myself that this was about finding clarity, not about distrusting them. Sending off the samples was excruciating. I carried the package to the post office as if it were a live bomb, handing it over with a forced smile that masked the turmoil inside me. The waiting that followed was unbearable. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my stomach churned. Every glance from my wife felt heavier, as though she could see the questions swimming in my mind. When the results finally arrived, I was alone in my office. My hands trembled as I opened the email, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every other sound. The words on the screen were clear and cold. 0% probability of paternity for all 3 children. At first, I couldn't believe it. I read the report over and over, hoping I had misunderstood. But the truth was undeniable. The children I had loved, raised, and devoted my life to were not biologically mine. The weight of that realization crushed me. Memories of birthdays, bedtime stories, scraped knees and whispered, "I love you," as flooded my mind, each one now tinged with a bitter sense of betrayal. These weren't just my children, they were my world. And now I didn't know what they were to me, or what I was to them. And then there was her, my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted with my heart and my life. She had kept this secret for years, weaving a web of lies so intricate that I hadn't seen it until it was too late. The betrayal was staggering, not just in its scope, but in its depth. I sat in that chair for hours, unable to move, unable to cry. When the tears finally came, they were uncontrollable, waves of anger, sadness, confusion, and heartbreak. But the hardest part was the silence. I had no one to confide in, no one to help me navigate the unbearable truth. When the shock began to subside, a new emotion surfaced: resolve. I needed answers. I needed to understand why. Armed with the DNA results, I knew I had to confront her. There was no turning back. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I called her into the living room. My heart was pounding, my hands gripping the papers as if they were a shield. The room, once filled with so many happy memories, now felt suffocating. As she sat down, I took a deep breath, knowing that the next few moments would change everything forever. She stepped into the room slowly, her expression a blend of curiosity and unease. It was clear she hadn't anticipated what was about to happen. The tension was thick, the kind that makes the air feel heavy, and every sound seemed louder. My grip tightened on the papers in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest as if it might burst. I couldn't contain it any longer. The question burned on my tongue, the culmination of countless sleepless nights and gnawing doubts. "Are they mine?" I asked, my voice low and unsteady, cracking under the weight of suppressed rage and disbelief. The words felt foreign as they left my lips, yet they carried all the anguish and betrayal that had consumed me. Her face froze, her eyes widening in shock. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale and vulnerable. Her gaze darted to the papers I held, recognition dawning in an instant. For a moment, she seemed caught, like a deer in headlights, her mouth opening slightly as though to respond, but no words came. A nervous laugh broke the silence, hollow and forced, an act of deflection. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. I slammed the papers onto the coffee table, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot. The documents lay there, stark and damning, a silent testament to her betrayal. "These," I said, my voice louder now, filled with fury. "Explain these." She stared at the papers, her eyes scanning the words that confirmed what I already knew. The color faded completely from her face as she realized the weight of what they represented. Her shoulders slumped as if the truth had physically struck her. For a moment, there was only silence. It was as if time itself had frozen, trapping us in this unbearable confrontation. The truth, raw and undeniable, hung between us like a guillotine ready to fall. I can explain," she stammered, her voice weak and devoid of conviction. "Explain what?" I demanded, my tone rising. "Explain that for 15 years I've been raising children that aren't mine? That you've been lying to me every single day." My voice cracked, the sheer weight of my emotions breaking through my attempts to remain composed. Her tears began to fall, silent at first, then escalating into audible sobs. She buried her face in her hands, her body trembling with the force of her cries. But her tears, once a source of comfort for me, only fueled my anger now. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered, her words barely audible, as if speaking them too loudly would make them more real. "Find out what?" I snapped. "That you cheated on me? That our entire marriage has been built on lies." She reached for my hand, her fingers trembling, but I pulled away instinctively, the thought of her touch now unbearable. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking under the weight of her desperation. "Just listen to me. It was a mistake a long time ago. I didn't know what to do." "A mistake?" I repeated, the words dripping with bitterness. 3 children, years of lies, and you want me to believe it was just a mistake? My voice grew louder with each word, the anger within me building like a storm. Her sobs grew louder, her body shaking as she tried to form a coherent response. But I wasn't interested in excuses. I wasn't interested in anything but the truth. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice cold and detached now, stripped of any warmth or affection. "Tell me." She hesitated, her eyes darting away from mine, unable to hold my gaze. That hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. There was someone else, a shadow in our lives that I had never seen, never suspected. My mind raced, piecing together moments that now felt tainted, memories that now felt like lies. "It's complicated," she finally said, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper, as if the words themselves might break her. "Complicated?" I roared, my composure finally shattering. "Do you even hear yourself? You've destroyed our family, and now you can't even be honest with me?" Her silence spoke louder than any words could. She didn't deny it anymore. She didn't try to fight it. And in that moment, I understood the depth of her betrayal. It wasn't just about the children. It was about every promise, every memory, every ounce of trust one had ever placed in her. "I'm done," I said finally, my voice quieter now but resolute. "I'm done with the lies. I'm done with you. And I'll fight for what's right, even if it means fighting against you." The days that followed were a blur. The house, once filled with laughter and life, now felt cold and empty. We avoided each other, the tension between us palpable. But avoidance wasn't enough. What she had done wasn't just a betrayal. It was a deception with tangible consequences. For years, I had poured my heart, time, and finances into raising children under false pretenses. The injustice of it all burned within me. I sought legal counsel, gathering the documents and recounting the story I could barely believe was my own. My lawyer explained that this was a case of paternity fraud, a legal term that validated the depth of her deception. I wasn't just a wronged husband. I was a victim of calculated dishonesty. The courtroom battle was excruciating. The details of our lives, our marriage, our family, were laid bare for all to see. Evidence of her infidelity was presented alongside the DNA results. She didn't deny the affair, but claimed she had believed the children were mine. Her defense crumbled under scrutiny, the weight of her actions undeniable. When the court ruled in my favor, awarding damages for the emotional and financial toll her lies had taken, I felt no victory. There was no triumph in this outcome, only a hollow sense of validation. The money meant nothing to me. What mattered was that the truth had been acknowledged. But the hardest part came after. Picking up the pieces of my life felt insurmountable. Therapy became my lifeline, helping me navigate the anger, grief, and loss that consumed me. I learned to forgive, not for her sake, but for my own. Forgiveness was a way to free myself from the chains of resentment and move forward. Though the pain lingers, I found strength in the lessons this experience taught me. Betrayal may shatter trust, but it also reveals resilience. It forces you to confront your deepest fears and emerge stronger. Now, as I rebuild my life, I carry those lessons with me, a testament to my ability to survive the unimaginable.